Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jeremy Fojut. I am the co-founder of NEWaukee. And today we're going to talk about remote employee engagement and a big picture, and then we're going to drill down to tactical things. What I've heard from some people that have been RSVPing is they want things they can use right now. So more tactical things. So I've kind of altered the presentation as we go through it to some things that you could implement tomorrow, and then some things that are bigger theory that you really might want to think about. So I've mixed it up a little bit. But NEWaukee is an engagement agency. We started 12 years ago, and just so everyone knows, our vision is to make new possible. And as people continue to enter in, they'll just... So I'm going to get started with a story. And I think this is really important because this kind of stuff happens a lot. When we think about engagement, we don't necessarily think about all the other outside the company things that involve engagement. But as you can see here, Jennifer, this is just a story of someone that moves from from California, which happens daily, right? Everybody's moving to Milwaukee from California. But she moved to start a new career, and on her first day, the team forgot she was starting this week. So they scrambled to get technology together. Her direct boss had a bunch of back-to-back meetings, and her key coworkers on vacation until next week. She's remote, so that there's none of that go to lunch together kind of time to build relationships. She hops on a Zoom call. Everyone says their name that's on the Zoom call, their department and role, and Jennifer's probably supposed to remember all those people. And then she's asked to talk about herself in front of 20 people on a Zoom call where 60% of the people have their camera off and may or may not be paying attention. And after the meeting goes on, their day becomes somewhat confusing because Jennifer doesn't have much to do. So she sits on back Zoom meetings with no context, ends up with Zoom fatigue. And, that story kind of happens all the time, right? When someone first starts, it's not just a one-off case. This happens a lot. And the lack of attention we pay to people that start at companies is kind of mind-boggling. We often celebrate people that leave companies. We throw parties for them, but when they start, we kind of say, get to work. We don't spend that time building trust. And this is really where disengagement begins. And a lot of people start thinking, did I choose the right place? And, what people don't probably realize is that someone like Jennifer maybe moved back home to be closer to family after some kind of loss or some kind of reason to be closer to home. And what happens when people actually leave where they're from to go somewhere else, they leave a strong social friend group and they become socially isolated. And those kind of life changes are really hard on people and they go unnoticed. When people move to a new city, when they go to a new school, when they have kids, when they have divorce, when, people think marriage, or when they think about marriage and think about people coming together, when people get married, they actually lose on average about 2 friends. So and then you think about empty nesting and retirement, all these things cause disconnection. And, people are more socially isolated than ever, obviously with COVID. But pre-COVID in 2018, Cigna did a study where 47% of people claimed to be socially isolated in the United States. And in 2019, that increased to 61%. And, that isolation is really a lot of disengagement at home, but also that impacts the workplace. But that was pre-COVID. So my question, rhetorical question is, how lonely do you think people are now during the pandemic? And there's numbers out there, but it's pretty substantial. So when people are lonely, this is kind of referred to as the silent pandemic that's going on. These kind of things, from a psychological point of view, that it affects your physiological reserves and it has an impact on you. And this impacts the workplace more than we even think about or probably even talk about in our office space. Lonely workers are less engaged than non-workers. They're twice as likely to miss a day of work. Lonely workers think about quitting their job more than non-lonely workers. And remote workers are more lonely than non-remote workers. You know, the funny thing is that 2 out of this, it might sound kind of hippy-dippy to some people, but you know, remote workers or people that are only 2 out of 10 people have a close friend at work. And that may not sound like, why would I want to be friends with people at work? But, you know, it's down from 3 out of 10 people. And, you know, we spend 40 minutes less per week than we used to with coworkers. So these kind of things have an impact on engagement more than we probably think about. And there's no shortage of statistics out there that when people say, you know, employee engagement results in this, you know, we know well-engaged employees are more productive. They save the company money. I mean, you could, if you just want to Google the results, I don't have to sit here and rip down a list of positives. I think we all know the stats. The question is, why aren't we doing more about it? So, one second here. So, I don't know if anybody has heard of Project Aristotle before. And shake your heads if you have, kind of. So, what's interesting about this study, it was done by Google, and they spent countless amounts of hours and millions of dollars to better understand people and what makes well-engaged teams. One of the companies, you know, this has been one of the most interesting, and one of the things that Google did was they kind of went with that theory that the best teams are going to have the people with the highest degrees, you know, the engineer plus an MBA or throw in a PhD, you know, that would make the perfect team. And what they found was they were absolutely dead wrong on this. You know, after 2 years of studying 180 teams and 200 interviews and analyzing over 250 individual attributes like people thinking introversion versus extroversion, all that kind of thing, there was no clear pattern of characteristics that made that kind of dream team engaged team. And, you know, the New York Times had a really interesting article on this. And when Google started considering the intangibles of what makes good teams, that's where things fell into place. And they came out with a couple of like 5 top things that made great teams. And psychological safety was number 1. Dependability, structure, clarity, meaning, you know, meaningful job, and impact. These were the 5 things that the best teams had. I'm going to focus just on psychological safety today. I'm not going to dive too deep into the others. But if people aren't familiar with the term, if you are, I'm sure a lot of you are, but I'll just kind of go what it really means. So psychological safety is kind of an individual's perception of consequences of taking risk, right? They're allowed to take risk on their team. People are tolerant of mistakes, and they're not going to feel like they're going to feel if other teammates know if they make a mistake. And in psychological safety, teams feel safe around with all their members. They're confident that no one they won't be embarrassed or punished for admitting a mistake or asking a question or offering a new idea. And you can kind of measure this by saying, you know, if you make a mistake on this team, is it held against you? Are members of the team able to bring up tough issues? Are people or sometimes react on this team went to risk in a negative way? So there, you know, there's a couple more of those. And you know, throughout all these interviews, Google and these observations, they found that psychological safety was the outcome that, you know, supported relationships and promoted friendship. And this means that people were allowed to take risks in different ways, socialize in different ways without negative consequences, and trust became a really crucial factor to promote this. Namely, it's important to create predictable environment with these relationships, right? So what do people expect from each other? And you can kind of see a little bit of a graph here on, you know, where trust is and where psychological safety is. And we've all been in toxic office politics and guarded relationships. But the question is, how do we keep building that in our companies? Or how do we keep building that in where we work? And sorry, I'm continuously letting people in the room here, so I apologize for that. And it starts with a mindset shift. For a year, we're remote now, and some people might be permanently remote, some people might be hybrid approach, but we think about all the physical infrastructure we have invested in to make people work better. From the conference rooms to your parking spaces, to the freeways, to lounges, to restaurants in the space, to breakout spaces, the network systems, the bars, outdoor space, decks, patios, cubes, offices, no cubes, open space, back to cubes, flex space, all these things we've invested in to make people work better, when we really should think about investing in the opposite, the intellectual infrastructure. How we think about cities and how we've built bigger arenas and big convention centers and new shiny things, and we call that a renaissance. Meanwhile, people continue to leave certain cities. We've trained people to value bricks over brains, and engagement values brains. We need to start thinking about investing more in this intellectual infrastructure, and I'm going to show you 10 ways to do that. We need to start building things that lead to engagement and culture, and that's friendship, that's shared experience, that's understanding of others, that's creativity. The investment in our companies, the investment in the mind, the body, the mental health, versus these physical constructs. And I'll just show you some physical constructs where companies were started that weren't Taj Mahals, right? When you think about the physical infrastructure investment in some of these sheds, they didn't need the massive buildings and massive breakout spaces to come up with great ideas. And just to respond to some of the chat, we will send this whole presentation out in a recording. Our NEWaukee's first office was in the basement of an abandoned mall next to a clown museum. We created something out of a space that wasn't a brand new office space with we didn't even have a coffee maker, I don't think, when we started. So when you think about these steps to building intellectual infrastructure in our communities and in our companies, you kind of want to start thinking about, one is, we have user manuals for pretty much everything we purchase in the world that is less hard to figure out than people. My recommendation around this is very technical. If you think about psychological safety, you think about understanding people and understanding each other, and you think about that term like treat others as you'd like to be treated. Well, really, what we're flipping that is treat others like they'd like to be treated. So my first recommendation, if you don't have this in a company or you're trying to think of ways, if we go back to that Jennifer story, if she on day one, she received a user manual of every team employee she was going to work with and how they work. It looks a little something like this. These are some of the questions a user manual will ask. What are some unfiltered things? What are your quirks? All these ways that people work. You could see that before Jennifer even started at her new company, she could have looked at a user manual of all the people she's going to work with and understood how to work. And here's kind of an example of one of our employees' user manuals. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but it gets pretty deep, right? And it gets a way to understand how those people work if you haven't built a lot of trust and you haven't worked with them a long time. And how do the question is, how do we better understand ourselves to even write something like that? Now I'm going to dive a little bit into personality here for those who don't know this. But I think we have to do a lot better job at our companies on training people how to understand how they work and how to understand themselves. And there's a difference between people's personality and people's personality traits. These often get kind of confused. Where a personality, we describe people as talkative and quiet or active. A psychologist's job is to understand these differences, right? And traits are the best indicators of those differences. There's 6 of them, actually. And when you start thinking about people's personality traits and how they fall into a low, medium, high traits, you kind of start to understand yourself. And if we did more training about understanding ourselves and our companies, we could probably understand how to make plans to have people be more productive and be a better version of themselves. So personality could change over time. Personality could change. Some people are really talkative at home, and some people are not talkative at all at work. That's a personality difference, right? That's not a personality trait. A trait would mean you're both talkative at work and at home. That would be your level of extroversion. A personality trait is pretty stable over your 30s, 40s, 50s. It doesn't change much unless you have some kind of extensive training, like maybe went to the military and come out completely different. You can change these traits, but it's important to understand the difference between someone's personality that could be around a nurture thing and some of these personality traits that there's been a lot of studies tied to DNA around some of this stuff. So I just kind of want to do this fun little game. You don't have to participate if you want, but I'd like you to please write in the chat 3 words that positively describe your personality. And you can put those in the chat, maybe along with your LinkedIn, so if you want to connect to other people. But what are 3 words that describe you positively? And I'll go a little deeper into this. So we'll keep those going, and I'll keep the presentation running here. But when you think about the 6 different personality traits that stay consistent over time, it's something called Hexaco, which is the most cutting edge research right now on personality. It's not pop culture. It's not like the Enneagrams and some of the DISC stuff. This is the real scientific work that has went into this. And there's humility and honesty, which is your sincerity, your fairness, your greed avoidance, your modesty. There's emotionality, which is like your level of anxiety, your fearfulness. There's your extroversion. I'm sure everybody is familiar with that one. Your agreeableness, which is how forgiving you are, how flexible and patient you are. There's your conscientiousness, which is your organization, your perfectionism. And then there's your openness to new experience, your creativity levels, your unconventionality. And all those 6 are different traits that kind of stay with you. And this is a really interesting study. They studied 1,200 pairs of identical twins around the world that were separated at birth. And they tried to measure the difference in those twins. Like, would they be different because they were brought up in a different household, in different circumstances? And what they found with those identical twins that were separated at birth had almost exactly the same personality traits as the other twin, no matter the upbringing, unless there was like some kind of severe level of trauma or multiple levels of trauma. You'd have, so it kind of starts to tie into if we understand kind of how we work and how we are as a person, we can better improve ourselves too. So, my recommendation here to build some intellectual infrastructure around this. The second is better understanding how people make decisions, and it has a lot to do with this personality. We all know extroverts and introverts and how they operate. I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with that one. Some of the other that we're not familiar with is really how people absorb information. And we have these conversations probably all the time. If the person didn't get it, I don't think they got what I was talking about. And it's because people absorb things differently. There's people that are, they're more realistic. They absorb information based on facts and figures, and they apply common sense around past experiences. And then there's people that are more big picture. This is kind of one of my traits is bigger picture. I see patterns. I'm creative to problem solutions, more of a divergent thinker. And then you have people and how they make decisions, right? So some people, like myself, use logical analysis. They object the weighing of pros and cons, and they value consistency. Whereas there's other people that are sensitive, they're cooperative, and they decide based on their own values, kind of like traditional values, and how they will affect others. And when you start thinking about this, if you've had any training on how people make decisions, you can kind of start to understand a better way to communicate with your teams and a better way to engage them. And then there's the kind of final one here is people that are spontaneous planners and are always late. They never have a plan. And then there's people that are completely organized and need 3 months to make a decision. There's those, you can see those are strong traits. And if you're starting to think in your mind of those people on your team, you can tell the difference. And those are all part of traits, right? So intellectual infrastructure is building trainings and information on how people operate. It goes back to that training manual. Any questions on that? Anything you want me to go deeper in on? Because I can have a whole presentation on this stuff, but I'm gonna kind of drift away from this a little bit, and I just wanted to stop there. If anybody any questions in the chat or come off and ask a question off mute. Otherwise, I'll keep going. If I was in the HR field, which, well, man, I'm in the HR field, but I would really start to build an infrastructure on the neuroscience of work. And I'm going to share a couple of things around how to build trust and really make decisions scientifically and start thinking about how you could build trust in your teams. Trust on your team isn't, when I ask a lot of people what the culture of their company is, they tend to say stuff kind of like, that's not work hard, play hard. Well, work hard, play hard isn't a culture. That's not what culture is. Or they say, someone will talk about an event they do, we're a culture of family. And that kind of starts to make a little bit more sense. And you'll have people definitely start to think a little bit more if you kind of ask them a few questions on culture. But really, to me, culture is trust, right? Do I trust the people I work with? And if there's an environment of this psychological safety, that's good culture. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of the neuroscience behind this. So everybody's probably, if you're not familiar with this, but when someone clicks a like on Facebook, it raises your level of dopamine. I'm sure we're all kind of familiar with that. We've heard the stories that, the more likes you get, the more reward, there's like a reward circuitry in your brain. So games like Pokemon Go and Candy Crush, they become addictive because of this reward circuitry, right? And that's one level of dopamine is something that's released in your brain, right? And so there's another chemical that's released in your brain around trust, and it's called oxytocin. And some of you might know this is the love hormone, right? It's a bonding thing between a baby and a mother, and also romantic partners and even friends. And there's been a lot of research around the study of oxytocin around trust and how to build it. And I'm going to share some of that, which is really, really interesting. So intentionality, being intentional about building these systems, these systems in your company can lead to oxytocin. So when you think about, we get a lot of messaging at work to focus on completing tasks, but not making friends. But a lot of neuroscience experiments show that when people build social ties at work, their performance improves. And going back to that Google study, what they found was expressed interest and concern for their team members and their personal well-being. Those teams outperform people on the quality and quantity of their work. So even with software engineers, and some of us might be in the tech field, especially with a lot of remote, we're talking about remote work. They studied hundreds and hundreds of Silicon Valley software engineers, and those who connected with others and helped people with their projects not only earn respect, but they actually they've seen increased levels of oxytocin that built more trust. And we can't do these sponsored lunches and these actor work parties anymore in person. Maybe that will be later, but for those of you that will go completely remote, these team building activities are going to look different. I'm going to show some of those of what we can do, but we live in a different world now, right? And the funny thing is we've at all these corporate sponsored lunches and the picnics, MIT did a fascinating study. And they used wearable technology on hundreds of people that wanted to meet new people at networking and corporate events. And they found that 96% of those people never met anyone new at those events. And what sticks out to me is that makes total sense, because people will go to those events and talk to the people they know. So we rely on serendipity all the time to do things through programs that don't actually create serendipity. They act, or not deliberate serendipity. They create, people are waiting for serendipitous moments that kind of never happen. And, one of the things that releases a lot of oxytocin is shared experience and plus time. And we think, obviously this equals trust, but just so everyone knows on the call, it takes about an average of 94 hours to turn an acquaintance into a meaningful relationship. It's a lot of time together, right? So how do you expedite stuff like that? And we know that the good feelings you express when you hang out with friends and you have that connection, that's levels of your oxytocin raising in your brain. So the trust and affection you have for your friends, that is really important. And the high levels of relationship trust, those things unleash creativity. You're going towards psychological safety because you trust each other. They unleash creativity, commitment, and enthusiasm. So, high levels of trust also come through high levels of expectation. When you think of a startup company that has 5 employees that can topple a company that has 10,000, because there's so much psychological safety in a startup. That's how they can do that. That's how they can build amazing ideas and amazing team to topple something that's stood for years. And what was funny was the Harvard Business School did a study on this as well, and they found, when they did a study on 12,000 employees from a variety of industries, and they found that 76% of people had their best days at work when they make progress towards goals with friends. So this friendship thing I keep talking about is really important, but it's building relationships. Not everybody's going to be intimate friends, but we can build levels of friendship. There's 4 levels of a theory of social penetration that you can actually build. But let's talk more about how we can do this. And then after this, we'll go into a couple of things you can do right now. So events and things and programs that you can do online to build engagement. But I just want to go back to building this intellectual infrastructure and using technology to do it. So I go back to that story of Jennifer at the beginning. Let's think about the difference between this experience. So if Jennifer, started her first day of work, nothing was ready. She was introduced to people at random, and nothing was set up. If we start thinking better about that as one of the most defining moments of someone's time at an employer, we start to think differently about it. So let's say 3 weeks before she starts, or 2 weeks before she starts, Jennifer receives a user manual with each person on her team to start off, and she can review those before she starts on day 1. And unlike most companies where we celebrate people retiring and longevity, we have a party on Jennifer's first day with her team. And there's time spent to connect with that person. So we celebrate the start of something, not just the end of something. And then what if on Jennifer's first day, she's matched using technology with 2 to 3 kindred spirits from across the company to break down some silos? What if she continuously meets with these people for 6 months that are like-minded, and there's a strategy, they talk opportunity, they talk corporate culture, and then after 6 months, what if she's then paired with a new pot of people that are opposites, that challenge them, that challenge traditional thought and challenge their kind of work in the company? It's 3 new people that, you start to build, and you keep doing this over time, and you repeat that process, and you start building these collectives, you start building deep, meaningful relationships in the office. And we're piloting this right now and testing this at NEWaukee. We're beta testing this. And, when someone starts on their first day or enters this program, we can actually match kindred spirits, people that would be like-minded together, using a proprietary algorithm that we're building. It looks something like this, where you could have kindred matches, and we measure based on life experience, based on personality traits, based on life stage, based on future aspirations. And you start to build a really meaningful network inside the company, and it becomes programmatic. It's setting up layers of intellectual infrastructure in that company. So this is another thing you can do to do that. And one of the funny things when you start doing that is, what do these groups talk about? If I meet two random people when I start a company, well, you start talking about achieving your goals, confronting challenges, things you might not understand about the culture yet. You start talking about, I might be the only person at my company that does this job. So we actually build something around that. Or you might feel alone in your industry because you're just starting. You might be brand new at the company. And this is building those relationships for you. And you don't want to do it alone. I kind of look at this a little bit as a BRG, a business resource group, for those unfamiliar with it, inside a company 2.0. I mean, you could essentially map out the strength of connections across the whole cohort of company and how they connect to each other. And we've done some piloting with this in some of our beta testing and some of our controlled groups, and we've seen results that have been pretty phenomenal, right? Of people increasing their change, them being a change agent, of increasing people belonging to a company, like they feel like they belong. We've seen an increase in people feel like they're a change maker, they're a risk taker, their collaboration goes up. We've seen creativity go up. So we've seen a lot of different metrics when you start thinking about people as people, and you start giving space for people to connect. And we've done some controlled groups, and people start posting organically on, of what I hear a lot is, how have we not met before? And so it's been pretty interesting that if you really want to take this stuff seriously, this is not physical, right? This is intellectual. This is putting people together. They don't have to have any buildings to do this stuff. This can be done completely remote and on Zoom. So when you think about companies that have, their workforce is completely remote, or their workforce is global, you think about how you could do this across different continents and different states even. So I kind of went through that.
Hey, Jeremy, would I be able to ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in this, it's really interesting about the user manual, the personal user manual. I guess in today's climate, is there any concern that we could be, especially as we talk about quirks, that there could be some profiling or potential, could it come back and bite you? Have you ever seen anything like that where, putting these user manuals together could potentially harm you legally, I guess? There's always risk on how things are interpreted, so you can limit the stuff on there. I could tell you that the company that created, or I don't know if you ever heard of the company Automatic, and they created WordPress. They've never had an office in person. They've always been remote. They have thousands of employees over the world. Everyone creates a user manual for the last, I believe it was 10 years. They've been a company, maybe 12 years. And they haven't had any issues, any legality issues. But yeah, you definitely, you want to be careful of what you put in there, and you definitely want to have your HR team look at it. And, just be cognizant of that, right? If people don't want to, you don't want to put stuff in there that they're going to be uncomfortable sharing or uncomfortable knowing about. That makes sense? But yeah, definitely it'd be a risk depending on where, yeah. And the word, and Andreas, you're right. Maybe some companies don't use the word quirks. That's NEWaukee's internal. We use that. We use this quirkiness. It's a cultural thing for us. So each culture of a company is different, right? So I'm just going to go into something that releases oxytocin that we can do every day, no cost. Start tomorrow. Start right now.
it was recognizing excellence. So when neuroscience shows that recognition has the largest effect on trust, when it immediately occurs after a goal has been met. So when it comes to peers, or when it's tangible, unexpected, personal, and obviously public recognition is the ultimate, right? That's the celebration of success in front of others. And it gives top performers a forum for sharing best practices, but you can also learn from each other. And they've done blood tests of people when they receive recognition from their peers that show a 67% increase in oxytocin when there is someone that gets recognized in front of others. And that could be one to a couple. So in other words, you kind of get what you celebrate, right? So setting up infrastructure around recognizing people, maybe even more than you already do, like, people get the Employee of the Month award. There's other ways to do it. I'm going to show you one we do within NEWaukee that has been pretty effective.
Who's that?
Every month we used to do inspiration breaks. Sorry, is there a question there? Sorry, okay. Every month we used to do inspiration breaks. We'd go to a different thing in our community with our teams, and we'd hang out and we get to learn our city. Well, that changed, right? That we had to do something online. And what we did was we actually gave employees an opportunity to talk about their passions in front of their team. And we've had many different, it's an hour once every couple weeks on a Friday around lunch. And it's a presentation, or it could be a round table, but it basically gives each employee an opportunity to talk about their stuff and be recognized for what they do. It could be work-related, it could be non-work related, but we've had many different ones. So sushi rolling, national park history, movie making, storytelling, learning to play music, and everybody listens with their screens on. So we can have a moment where people are not multitasking. And it's been pretty impactful to hear what passions and what connections that are made from other people that you didn't know about them, right? So this is something that releases oxytocin. It's something that you can do for free. It's something that builds on the confidence of people. Not everybody is not required to do it if you don't feel comfortable, but it's one of those things that allows us to build relationships with each other. Another thing that we do internally and externally, we've done this for a lot of companies actually, is back in March, you think about, well, let me just actually take a step back. When you think about how we used to network, and I talked about that MIT study where people actually went to events to actually meet people, but 96% of people actually never meet anybody new that ends up being anything meaningful beyond like an introduction. So when you think about all the different networking events we go to, there's kind of limits on that serendipity. So we thought we'd create an event that also releases oxytocin around reflecting around yourself. So we built these rapid fire personal reflection based networking programs, and we've built a couple of them out in the community. We've built and I started one back in March to December just to see how it would work. And then we do them inside companies as well. And we've seen some really interesting results. So how it works first is, so every Thursday, I did one in the community, every Thursday of every week, pretty much till the end of the year, we did these themed networking events. And I don't know if anybody knows the capabilities of Zoom, but when you can create a lot of breakout rooms in Zoom, like we could right now, of randomness, and you can time them. And there's all these really easy ways to get people in and out of rooms to meet new people on their team or across company sector or silos. So we've done these reflection networking events that are rapid fire. We've done them around 2020 goals. This was last year. Getting unstuck in your career, personal growth, mental health, reconstruction of your workday, giving back, confronting challenges, personal resilience. And the difference of energy when someone comes into that program and leaves is mind-blowing to me. and the personal like thank you emails you get because of connecting people, especially how we are now remotely connecting to each other and just giving space for someone not to have such a superficial conversation, but getting a little bit more deeper. And that level of authenticity has really helped. And this is a way that you can provide an engaged person by connecting them with other people, but also connecting them around something more meaningful than, we're going to have lunchtime together where we're just going to have an awkward thing with 50 people on the Zoom or 20 people on the Zoom where no one wants to speak up. And, what if you go back to that personal playbook or that personal user manual and you start thinking about that, some people are introverts. That's not how they communicate. So you were setting this program this is almost became a networking event for a lot of introverts. So this sets people up in thinking about how they operate to increase engagement and increase connection to the company and go back towards that goal of psychological safety. Can you comment, please, about gender involvement with these initiatives? Visuals from the photos. Oh, the photos, these are from just events that NEWaukee's done over time. They're not from the photo of this actual event. So these are photos from the shift event we do, which is actually next Monday. Just so you know, we're just using NEWaukee photos for the visuals. So another thing that we have built inside companies that has been interesting is when you start building and you want to release oxytocin in people, again, you want to recognize them for their creativity, their insight in solving problems. So if you've ever noticed how typical brainstorming works in brainstorming sessions and meetings, maybe right now, if I was to say, let's brainstorm ways to improve employee engagement, how many of us would actually speak up and talk? And that basically what I'm doing is I'm setting ourselves up for not having everybody's opinion. And one of the things that we can do is, we always expect someone to be so, we have all these reactive brainstorming meetings. Like I'm going to tell you something, I want you to react to it in an instantaneous moment. And most people actually can't think like that. So we discredit people as saying they didn't participate in something because they couldn't come up with an idea right now. What seems to be, why don't they seem engaged? And when you start thinking about it differently, you realize that you could go about brainstorming a lot different. And you could start setting up internal reverse pitches or problem solving. It doesn't have to be a live pitch, but if we're talking about challenges and giving people more time, especially in a remote world where people can be across time zones, we put forth the challenge in a chat or in out in an email, and we say next week or 2 weeks from now, we come to this meeting, here's what we're going to be talking about. Because the most ideas and most creative ideas come from moments of subconscious mind takes over, right? Think about ideas that you're in the shower, or you think about ideas when maybe if you're on a run. But over and over a million times a day, we have these spot-on brainstorming meetings where we want problems solved instantaneously. And it's just not a way, and it disengages people a lot of times. And people will be, maybe even turn their monitor off, or they won't participate, or they mute. So if we can build cultures internally around that embrace this curiosity. So we want to nurture curiosity culture because it makes us more present to the journey and more creative at being better communicating with each other. So that's kind of a thing that we would do is, having these kind of reverse pitches or reverse problem solving, but having it ahead of time is really important. And having these, allowing people to follow up. And I'll just give you another really interesting neuroscience thing on following up. So, and around trust. So when people follow up with people, they did a study around 5,301 individuals from across many different countries. And scientists found when people remembered to follow up, it released a huge amount of oxytocin to the brain that created trust, right? That trust chemical. And follow-up is very important. So when we provide people with a time to solve a problem or an idea to solve a problem, we're building upon that as from a neuroscience standpoint. And then step 9 here is the future is written communication. in a lot of ways. If you've talked to any companies that have been remote, we started talking a little bit about personal, how I work, like user manuals for myself. And then we started talking about a couple other ways, but a lot of this is written, right? And I've heard of companies doing text stand-ups. If you have a small team, that could be done on any type of technology platform, or my team texts each other about some stuff a lot, depending on your level of comfortableness in your team. But tech stand-ups could be really cool. We got to start thinking about asynchronous communication, right? People are going to be working at different times. People are going to be in different time zones, and written communication is going to be even more important than trying to get everyone together at one time to do one thing. One of the things that we do that you could probably do that's been amazing at our company is it's called FODs. It's called Facts of the Day. At the end of each day, every employee does a reply all, and you can do this many different ways, but they do a reply all with some of the key highlights of their day, whether it's a meeting, whether it's they finished a client proposal, or whatever they're doing, and whatever is important to that day for them. And it takes two minutes to do it. But everybody replies all, and you have this chain of seeing what everybody is creating. And what it does is we then don't have to come to the meeting and waste time about, well, I didn't know that was going on in the company, or I didn't know that was happening, or I don't know what's the status on this. And yes, we can still talk about those things, but you get a better idea of everything that's happening on your team. And it's a practice that it's an intellectual infrastructure thing that allows us to be asynchronous. So, and then finally, kind of my step 10 here as we get to the end of the presentation is, there's going to be a lot of change. There already has been a lot of change. And there's been a lot of upsides and there's been a lot of downsides to remote work. I think thinking about work is going to have to be different, right? I kind of wrote something the other day around the 9 to 5 being dead. I couldn't really be more excited for that. My levels of productivity don't work in 4-hour blocks. I don't think a lot of people's do. 9 to 5, if anybody's not familiar with how that came about, it came about in the industrial age when people were working 9 to 5. That if we're in the knowledge economy now, the knowledge age is going to work differently. I've reconstructed my workday. It's allowed me to engage better, I believe. I've done 2 hours in the morning. I'll go for a run. I'll do an hour later. I might work at different times, and it might almost feel like that theory that you're living in Italy and you get this time off in the middle of the day. But I'll tell you what, my happiness has went up, my productivity has went up, my creativity has went up, and not sitting at my desk, being consistently interrupted by others has allowed me a lot more space to think. Now, what's missing, obviously, is when you're not in person, you're missing a lot of your senses, right? You're missing a lot of social cues, and there's a lot to that. But there has been a lot of good to this. So, when we start thinking about the future here and setting up boundaries of how people work is going to be really important. And then, when you think about if you're on the line and you're someone that's going to attract talent and you're out there looking, everything has opened up where we used to have people we had to hire hyper local. I mean, a benefit to a lot of companies will be hiring from anywhere and having you work there. If we're, and the more candidates. I mean, I've seen even ourselves of people that are applying to jobs that we have open that are crazy, the amount of people in response we're getting compared to when it was just locally. And, that's going to present many challenges in communities, but it's a reality, right, of what's going to happen for good or for worse. But, at the end of the day, I'm talking a lot about setting up this intellectual infrastructure online and not thinking about everything so physical. But humans are still going to crave in-person attention. But we can use these things I've said today to really build culture in remote workforce. And we just have to think and design things in moments and focus on the attention of our employee experience better than we usually do. My name is Jeremy. If you have any other questions, again, here's my contact information if you want to reach out. Any questions? You can come off mute. I got someone that direct messaged me a question that I'll just read. If you want to talk about building, or wait, sorry, I have a lot of messages here. Is there any science behind Zoom fatigue? Okay. Yeah. So people's reward, the way they perceive rewards is actually different. So in person, when you think about a connection you've made, the time you spent, and the investment in that place and where the meeting happens and the environment around you, there's more reward to a meeting. It's like a feeling, and this is like a neuroscience thing, but you actually don't feel the same kind of reward when you go on Zoom after a meeting. It's very time structures, and a lot of people, you'll notice they're a lot more productive because they're having meetings faced back to back to back to back to back, but not having time in between meetings to digest and reflect on that meeting and decompress actually is what leads to a lot of Zoom fatigue. Staring at yourself leads to a lot of Zoom fatigue. So there's a lot of other science behind Zoom fatigue. Not that it's, it is real. People are, but it's mostly because we're scheduling things back to back and we're sitting stationary as opposed to how we used to. Great. Any more resources on intellectual infrastructure? I should probably write more. There isn't really a lot. I made it up. I mean, like that's, so I can write more on it, but I would hope more people think like this in the future, because how many more physical things are we going to build as opposed to focusing on people's mental health and their brains?
Hey, Jeremy, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I know that there is like a connection between burnout and building psychological trust, like in companies, yeah. But I'm also curious, like with people going remote, if there were seeing an increase in burnout with everything that's going on with the pandemic, and then also like people not being accustomed to some of the things to like really be like breaking down their day differently, like doing back-to-back Zoom meetings and things like that. So are companies starting to catch on that they have to encourage their employees to work differently in order to change, like to reduce burnout?
Obviously it's hard for me to find out what every company is doing. I know that I would say we need a lot more attention on social isolation. I mean, it is a pandemic that we don't talk about day to day because it's uncomfortable. You don't go up to someone and admit I'm isolated or lonely, right? So so people that are socially isolated actually will have a lot more burnout. And one of the things so your question is, are more companies thinking about it? I'm sure people are. People are showing up to the presentation today because we're talking about how to engage people better. I think it comes back to, if I had to have step number 11, it's building presentations or training around how we can work better. We focus, I even, when I talk to some people, there's so much focus on how many hours you put in over the impact you put in. And I kind of go back to when I always hear people say, well, someone works 60 hours, they're burned out. And yeah, when you start thinking about, some people could make, from a sales perspective, you could make 20 sales in 10 hours, or you could make one sale in 60 hours. What would you rather have? So it's about the outcomes we create. And I don't know if this totally answers your question, because going back to companies that are thinking about it, I hope they are. I mean, it's going to be even more important as we don't see people every day. Even when we go back, a lot of companies aren't going back, especially in the knowledge economy. So, I think there just has to be more thought work in how, when I started talking about understanding yourself and understanding other people, there's a lot more work that has to be done in that. And, we just touched on the tip of that, and we could go a lot deeper into understanding how people make decisions. So can you touch on building engagement in smaller teams where faith and trust are issues. Well, that's a whole nother hour presentation, Sally. It goes back to, so people, one-to-one meetings help. We do a lot of one-on-ones at NEWaukee. That we mandate one-on-one time with people within their team, and they don't have to do work at that time. And the reason we do that is because you spend an hour with somebody. If conversation becomes awkward or dry, or you can't think of what to talk, you start talking about other things, and sometimes it leads. It's creating that deliberate serendipity to have these moments where trust comes up. That's emphasizing one-to-one meetings is important to just talk about how each other work. If every trust issue is going to be different, so it's really hard to speak to a generalization of why there are trust issues in the first place. So it's how do you find out where the trust lies and how you fix that? So it's a hard question to really answer. Okay, well, we're kind of approaching that hour. Again, reach out to me if you want to. I appreciate everyone's time today, and I'd love to continue the conversation or even deep dive more with you if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me or so forth. Thanks, guys. Cheers.